Welcome to another episode of Zeitgeist Radio, the musical podcast where each episode we explore the connection between music and culture from the past to the present. Zeitgeist means spirit of the times and is the collection of cultural forces that all contribute to what it feels like to be alive and part of a dynamic culture. Music is a huge part of that, and in this podcast we explore all the ways culture and music are intertwined. I'm your host, Morgan Rowe, founder of the Zeitgeist Academy. My guest today is Ian Boswell, a composer and musician based out of State College, Pennsylvania. Ian also created the music for Zeitgeist Radio and was there for my first official Zeitgeist moment, which started this decades-long journey that has culminated in the Zeitgeist Academy and Zeitgeist Radio. Ian, welcome to Zeitgeist Radio.
No, thanks, Morgan. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. So you and I have known each other for so long, and we've shared probably the most intense musical journey.
Probably.
So Ian and I are those friends that, you meet friends in college. College is such a transformative time. It's really intense. You've got all these people who are deciding who they're going to be smushed together in these overcrowded dorms with no personal space.
Yep.
So that's just you're figuring it all out together. And I feel like we kind of latched onto, being buddies of, here's who we want to be together, and specifically in a musical way. And what's so cool to me is we started in the same place, the exact literal same place, same classes. And then, since college, our paths have gone in fairly different ways. I've kind of stayed. I actually haven't changed that much. I'm still in the same, I'm still in an SATB choir that performs with an orchestra. I'm still in a women's ensemble.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. You were able to keep a lot of consistency.
Yes, which could be good or bad versus, you went, you went and actually explored other things too. So if you were to describe yourself right now musically, what would you say?
Well, definitely still exploring. Right now, I feel like I'm heading in a direction where I'm starting to feel like I'm getting closer to something that I feel like is, oh yeah, this is sort of what I do. This is the kind of musician I am. But it's been a bit confusing. It's not been a straightforward path. But I think, specifically, I think studying jazz is bringing me, I guess, up to speed with the kind of musician that I think I actually want to be. That's letting me get in touch with the kind of music that I feel like is important to me.
Yeah.
The desire for having the sort of discipline.
Yeah.
That it's not just about getting better or something, but it is about maybe connecting with something meaningful. It was actually music theory classes that convinced me that I wanted to become a music major, because it was for lack of a better word, it was just so juicy. It was I was getting into this stuff. I was getting these answers to things that I had been wondering about, and I was able to, find, terms for things, discussion for these things that I've been feeling and kind of interacting with. So actually getting to explore that concretely was just so rewarding for me. And
I want to point out a little bit, since I've been out of college, how it's actually kind of weird that we all just dove in and took theory for fun.
Yeah,
that's not what a lot of people do.
No, yeah, it's really not. It's funny, right? But for me, yeah, I came into college. My piano teacher in high school had started giving me some basic music theory and counterpoint lessons because I was curious and I'd started composing. And so I already knew, all right, this stuff is cool. I want to do more of this. So that was one of my priorities. Okay, I'm definitely going to take a music theory class.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit freakish because usually music theory is the kind of thing that turns people off, right? It's
yeah, exactly. That's why a lot of people stop.
Yeah.
I just want to play my instrument.
Yeah, we were in, I think, most, if not all, the same music theory classes.
Yeah, and honestly, I wasn't even a music major until senior year.
Yeah, you were sort of
I just
kind of
hung
arm
out
twisted
with...
into being a music major.
Well, I just looked at how many credits I had. Mark Mazzullo, our mutual piano instructor, he was kind of my informal advisor. I had my real major of
your shadow
anthropology,
advisor.
and then I talked to Mark. And he's like, Morgan, you have a lot of credits.
Yeah. But this is one of the great things about the McAllister music department
Yeah.
is that it wasn't strict like that. Like it was only later on that I realized that it wasn't necessarily normal for it to be like this, which
Yeah.
I feel like it's a much more enriched musical experience when you have people who are like chemistry majors or like whatever, anthropology majors like you were, or other people. It's just like, I mean, there was some huge percentage of people who were involved with the department, relatively small number of majors and minors, but and all the
Yeah.
ensembles, taking the classes, learning music, and then also what was great for all the music students, the cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Like it's everybody does have these different backgrounds in music, different interests. They've done different things, but we're all very passionate about learning it and
Yeah.
putting things together. So you get all these different perspectives and like what these concepts, mean to different people too, or where they kind of, I mean, if I think of a lot of the jazz classical crossover thoughts I've had, it kind of stems from that notion.
Yeah. I remember a very particular moment because I also had a ton of friends in the physics programs. And I remember a moment that they all went to class and they learned about this mathematical concept called the overtone series.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, oh, yeah, the overtone series. And they look at me like, what? Like, this is like a 300 level course. And they're like, what do you know about the overtone series? I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
I've known about this since I was in, high school. And there was that
very
crossover. Very, very cool conversations that came from that because their minds were blown a little bit like, wait, it was like a practical application of this theoretical concept. And then I actually got to understand a little better, the math behind it. It was pretty cool. So we were pretty classical. And then, like I said, you branched out, got weird.
Yeah, right.
A stint in electronic music, which I absolutely could not figure out.
Yeah. Yep, there was an electronic music, little old school electronic music lab there. You could still kind of cut up and glue tape together if you wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And
but you
yeah,
got pretty into that.
I did. I mean, yeah, and I still am.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, it's a very different way of making music.
Yeah. I mean, so what was your master's in? It was in electronic
music composition.
Specific electronic?
No, not. I mean, I did do some electronic stuff there. My
remember
advisor,
you being really excited about that part of the program.
Yeah, I ended up. My advisor ended up being a guy who did do a lot of electronic music, and it was really cool working with him. We worked on a range of things. It wasn't, there was definitely some electronic stuff happening, but also, he helped me writing like symphonic music and chamber music, and so it still was of kind of a variety. I guess I have maybe it's sort of like a restlessness that I have creatively. Sometimes I envy people who have the kind of focus that you do, that you're so consistent and you're just like doing the one thing. Like I'd be so much better at things if I would just stick with them.
Yeah, but I definitely have a very narrow zone where I'm good at these things, but it really is all I do. It would be good for me to branch out a little more.
Yeah.
So you compose, you perform a little bit. What would you call yourself right now, musically? Mostly composer?
Honestly, just a musician.
A musician?
Like I feel like I'm still composing stuff, but it's not really primarily what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Mostly what I'm doing these days is playing and improvising.
Yeah.
And arranging. Like in some of my collaborations I've done, it's like for this vaporwave show I was spearheading in the fall, I was arranging NPR theme music and some electro jazz fusion stuff from the 90s for like an 8-piece mixed band of there was like rhythm section, Chinese dulcimer, banjo, all kinds of crazy stuff. So I guess, and I say musician not to be vague, but just in the sense of, I think this is like a Bach thing where he had all of his students compose, perform, and improvise, right?
Yeah.
That's, I think, my journey now is like, okay, I've done a lot of the composing stuff. I've done a lot of the performing stuff because, like you, my background is very classical.
Yeah.
So improvisation, I really only started to get natively comfortable with it after college. The performance and improvisation part, for me, I'm realizing how much those inform the composing part. Like everything informs everything else.
Yeah.
And for me, what I feel like are the gaps I want to fill in between what I can do and what I want to do involve becoming a better performer and a better player and a better improviser. And also just even a better listener, like
Yeah.
so developing the overall sensibility of a musician is what's important to me right now. And to me, for whatever kind of musician I am, that is kind of a jack of all trades musician, where if even in kind of a more classical space, it involves being able to sight read or, kind of fudge parts, if you're accompanying something, like the choir accompanist role or something, like, okay, yeah, maybe you're not going to play all those notes, but you know how to look at a score and pick out what's enough to give them what they need while still
Yeah.
kind of translating the soul of whatever the piece is. So,
See, my brain explodes a little bit when you say that because those are all neat. Like they're all professions in and of themselves. Every single thing you
yeah.
just said. Like there's professional accompanists who blow my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Like to be
Yeah.
able to just sit down and accompany. Obviously, improvisation, a lot of jazz, and we've talked a lot about how in the classical tradition you don't really get that. It used to be more of a thing, like, uh,
Yeah.
and it just really fell off. And now a lot of classical musicians, I know so many people who are classically trained and have such like a desire and also a lot of angst around the idea of improvising. It kind of freaks them out.
Yeah. Well, and it still kind of freaks me out. Like,
It freaks me out.
specifically improvising over changes,
Yeah.
because there's stakes there. Like free improv, I'm very comfortable with because there's, like nobody's expecting anything, so you can do whatever you want. Um, but yeah, you're improvising over changes. Suddenly there's an expectation for harmony, or if you're playing a specific tune, there's an expectation for a particular feeling that you're evoking. Um,
Right.
it really is a shame that improvisation fell out of classical music, because, and there's no reason why it should have. Because, the what Beethoven had, dueling piano sessions in, 19th century Germany, and Rachmaninoff even was still improvising his own cadenzas. And I don't know, do people still improvise their own cadenzas anymore? Are there still some pianists who do that?
I'm
There have
sure
to be at
there
least a
are.
couple.
I'm sure there are, but there's also like a level of purity of being able to play the cadenza as it's
Yep.
written, and people get focused on that. But
or
that's
or
not the
even
spirit of it.
No, it's like they'll learn note for note the cadenza that Rachmaninoff did back in, the
Right.
40s or whatever.
Right. Which he I
Which
mean,
is
I'm sure
great,
he
but
built structure into it, but then he probably I mean, there's no way he played it the same way twice.
don't you think that even if classical musicians generally didn't improvise on the stage, if improvisation was part of their training, don't you think that would help them in performing the pieces? Like,
So much.
just
I'm actually I've been so impressed the last couple of years. You and I have had conversation, like hours of conversation about you doing this, and just
hmm,
like what a at a point in your development, it was kind of a monumental decision to learn jazz. It was like something you'd always wanted to do, but it was kind of scary. And then
yeah,
one day you just decided, no, I'm going to do it. And I
with
mean,
some
now
big
you
moral
talk
support
about
from
it.
you there.
Well, you talk about it so comfortably now, and I'm so proud of you.
Oh, well,
but
thanks.
but it was a bit of a it was a bit of a thing because we were never exposed to any of the basics of improvisation. I was never exposed to the basics of improvisation.
No, I wasn't
Um,
either. Despite, I mean, we've both listened to plenty of improvised music and enjoy a lot of improvised music, which is also kind of
yeah,
ironic.
yeah,
But yeah, and I bounced off of jazz a bunch of times. Like I've tried learning it and sort of thrown up my hands and said, "Oh, this is too much."
yeah.
I started trying to do it in high school, and it was really kind of awkward, and I didn't really feel that great about it. Did a little jazz combo playing in college,
Mm-hmm.
got a little further, had some great guidance from Joan Griffith, she was just awesome. And I grew more there, but I was still pretty uncomfortable with it. And then I tried to do it a little bit more sort of post college here and there, and then was trying to do it a little bit self-study on my own. And honestly, a lot of why I've been able to make such progress is that I just found a really good teacher who has a methodology for teaching structured improvisation. Um, it is kind of, here's a ridiculous thing. I think this is a ridiculous idea that I have, that maybe a lot of other classically trained people have, that jazz is like black magic. It's like sorcery. You're sort of stirring the call. Like, wow, how did they do all that stuff? They have to be magicians. There's clearly like a devil's pact.
Yes.
We couldn't approach it with a method. Certainly not. It's too magical. It's too transporting and cool. It's like, no, it's kind of like, it's a lot like playing Chopin etudes. Like,
Yes.
okay, yeah, there's a method for approaching this. You don't just sort of sit down with it and just kind of, hit your head against it. There's a lot of specific practicing methodology that lets you be able to do something like that. It's really just the same with jazz and improvisation. And it's just very stupid that it's considered this very separate,
Yeah.
skill set or something.
And I
So
think it
much
goes
overlap.
both ways too, because I've met jazz musicians who are just in awe of classical. The whole class. It's almost like there are these two very different like masters of, if you're really good at either one of them, it's like you're in one tree and you're looking at someone else in another tree and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, how did you get up there? And it's like, well, you're up there too.
Yeah.
You have to climb the tree.
Yeah, exactly. And then like at the top, the branches sort of intertwine.
They do. Yeah, ideally. Is that where you are?
God, well,
Is that the top?
I'd hardly say I'm at the top. Maybe I'm at the lower level of the upper canopy, which is like a mile high.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like concretely a lot of that comes from the notion of just the skill set of learning to play written music versus learning to play by ear.
Yes.
Because the people who I've met who are kind of amazed by classical music and sort of think that's black magic often have just learned to play by ear, and they might be great musicians, but they're uncomfortable with they haven't
you
they
put
haven't
a score in
internalized.
front of them and they just blink.
So much of this stuff is internalization, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
what are you automatically able to pull out intuitively? And that just takes a lot of time.
yes.
It takes a lot of dedicated time to get that into that internal state.
Yeah, hours and hours and hours of being alone in a practice room with a piano.
Yeah.
Or whatever your instrument is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned arranging. Okay, first of all, banjo. I didn't know. Did you tell me about this project? What is this project? NPR music? I don't think you told me about this project.
Okay, so the bigger part of it is part of the Space Lounge concert series that I started before the pandemic, and we've done 3 of them now. And the idea, and I've had this idea for a long time, we probably even talked about it in college, where my idealized concert venue is, I like to call it like my idealized 18th century concert hall, where dedicated listening in the front, party in the back.
Yes.
You, the audience, modulate what you want out of the experience, because some people are going to really just want to sit down and just listen. That's great. That's fine. But a lot of people either don't enjoy that or don't want to do that, or that's not the way they dig music. So they can walk around, have a drink, talk with their friends, and they're still getting the music. It's still coming into them. And then meanwhile, the musicians have the benefit of a much more relaxed atmosphere where there's the creative interplay for everyone. So that was kind of the one ingredient of the Space Lounge series, the lounge part. And then the space part was thinking it would be fun to try and go for like a retro-futurist aesthetic, like a 1960s Bond villain, or Star Trek. This, like the Star Trek lounge, the
Yeah.
the lounge deck, that kind of feeling. And and actually a lot of there was a very specific impetus, which is I played a Sun Ra show with this group Open Music, which is a group of just sort of esoteric musicians around in the area here. Anyway, so long story short, there's this sort of venue now, and then each year we do a slightly different angle on it. And so in the fall we did a vaporwave show. Are you familiar with the vaporwave genre at all?
I am not.
It's another kind of retro-futurist genre. So like imagining the future as people used to imagine it. And vaporwave is like the idealized future of the 80s and 90s of these bright colors and palm trees and everything's kind of neon, you know, turquoise and pink and everything. And and it's vaporwave. It's a mixed bag. It's not just this sort of retro future. There's also this sort of like melancholy or just despairing quality to it. It contains a lot of different stuff.
This sounds very Ian so far.
Yeah, maybe that's why I'm so drawn to it. But I really like this sort of hopeful angle of it, and the music that inspires vaporwave is a lot of music I've just genuinely enjoyed. Like I grew up listening to it, like Jan Hammer and stuff like that, and so NPR themes. So we were, yeah, like it is very interesting. Like a lot of that aesthetic comes from, I think, really high level studio musicians in operating in the late 20th century, and so stuff like BJ Liederman NPR themes, where you have like I don't know if you've heard or remember the old theme for Morning Edition. It was like do 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 do. So, and it's sort of like smooth jazzy kind of sounding.
Yeah.
And I read somebody describing that as it's as if it comes from an alternate universe where Steely Dan made government propaganda. And that's like very vaporwave.
I see.
So it's
when I picture that theme, I smell pancakes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a great theme. I mean,
yeah,
it's so that's kind of the fun part of it. It's like it's a little kitschy, the vaporwave thing. It's kitschy, but also like I really like the music. Like I just actually really like it.
nice.
And so you can have fun with it in that way. And then the miscellaneous quality of the band is that it's kind of a community band. So it's sort of like all these composers concerts and stuff we used to have in college. It's actually that same kind of thing, because it was sort of like, okay, who's interested, who's writing music, who wants to put some music together, and it would just be very random. Like, okay, we have somebody playing bassoon, we got somebody on the electric guitar, we got somebody on the cello, okay, who wants to write something for this? So that's what we've got. It's like we have somebody who's trained in like classical Chinese opera and plays some of the pit instruments from that. Okay, so that's an element we can have. We have someone who's playing the banjo. We have a couple people on electronics, a couple percussionists, bass player. Yeah, so it's like there's a lot of interesting textural possibilities.
That's insane. I have got to come to one of these.
Yeah, you do.
I'm just trying to picture, like, okay, first of all, classical, like, again, each one of these is like its whole own thing.
Right.
Classical Chinese opera, very specific.
Yeah.
Banjo, usually very specific type of genre. So do you pull in any of that cultural influence that comes with some of these instruments? Or do you just take the pure sound and say, I'm going to make it whatever?
Yeah, so this is the interesting thing about open music specifically, is that a lot of the sort of writing tradition or arrangement tradition for this group, originally we were getting funded by these grants that the program dried up, but the grant was contingent on anybody needs to be able to participate on it regardless of musical training. So by that requirement, then there was a general requirement of our arrangements that they can't be too specific, and they can't rely on you having a dedicated, a knowledge of our we can't expect them to read music, basically.
Right.
So there's a lot of the structure is more big picture and more improvisatory, where we say, okay, like who wants to play the theme? You'll play the theme, and then how about you fill in this texture here? Here, this is the A section. You're playing the melody. We've got this texture, this texture, this texture, and then so basically the specifics are delegated. So we can say, for instance, like Chinese dulcimer. I'm not writing notes that she's playing. I'm saying like, hey, how about a dulcimer solo here? Then she brings out whatever she thinks is appropriate.
This
So
kind of sounds like in C a little bit.
It's It's that kind of tradition.
Which, for people who don't know what that is this wild piece, I guess you'd call it a piece, that we did in college.
Dusk Till Dawn one time.
Dusk Till Dawn, yeah. You set up and we'd play. I think that one hit 12 hours.
I guess it probably did.
I think it did. I think I remember hearing it hit 12 hours. But you just play, and musicians come in and come out, and it's all in the key of C.
Yeah, somebody's always hitting C's.
Yeah.
And then there's these different little cells of music that people can play. So here's it's like musicians are presented with their menu of options. And you're sort of generally supposed to go through them in the same order, roughly, but there's a lot of autonomy in how you do it.
Yeah. People take solos and people around. Yeah. So it sounds like a little more structured version of that.
Yeah. And we actually are playing a piece that's very NC-like at the end of the month here.
Nice. You can play for 12 hours?
No. I'm old now. I don't have that kind of madness in me. Yeah. But if somebody did say like, hey, let's do a Dusk Till Dawn thing, I think maybe I would.
Yeah. Oh, you totally would. I mean, you don't have to be there the whole time. Someone just needs to make sure it continues.
That's right. That's right. Shifts are important.
Would you say, as far as like what you connect with right now, would you say you connect still most strongly with classical, or do you connect more with jazz or something in between, or what do you connect with?
That is kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure I ever like majority connected with like just one genre. Even before I started to play jazz, I was listening to jazz. Actually, I remember my dad gave me some CDs like Charles Mingus and Miles Davis and just some classics. And I found out that I could start like if I was playing a video game, I could launch the video game with the CD, and I could take the CD out, and then because usually the video game soundtrack would play off of the CD, I could take the video game CD out after I launched the game, stick in Mingus, and then the video game would play Mingus as my like background music.
That's awesome.
So I guess I've always been sort of an eclectic listener, and growing up, my dad played all kinds of stuff. So as far as what I connect with now, yeah, it's really a mix. It's less about like, I think if anything, the stuff I most listen to is probably jazz, but
that's also what you're studying.
It is what I'm studying, so that informs it a lot. I'm definitely still listening to a lot of classical music too. And I'm actually playing some Renaissance music, getting back into that. I don't know, listening to a lot of space music, the kind of electronic stuff, Hearts of Space, going through a lot of those programs. I guess it's less about, especially since I've started studying jazz, I just feel like music is music, like it's all music, elements of music. Studying jazz is just filling me in on the other elements of music that I didn't learn by studying classical music. But studying classical music has brought me up to speed so that I don't have to fill in everything. Like if I started out blank and I was only studying jazz, I would have to fill in a lot of the stuff I learned studying classical music. So it's all just these different sides of the same thing, me.
Yeah. Yeah, you just connect to music.
I just connect to music. I do see a lot of classical music live. I guess I feel like I mean, maybe this isn't exactly the question, but I connect with classical music more live than recorded. Like, It's good that there are recordings of classical music, but I think of all genres, a recording really doesn't capture fully what classical music is and does. You have to see it live.
I'm so in agreement. And actually, classical recordings kind of get under my skin a lot because I guess this is something, as I'm learning more about audio engineering, which my level is very, very, very basic. But there's this thing that I recently learned how to do called normalizing.
Oh, okay.
Basically, you kind of control how loud something gets, how soft something gets. And I feel like as a listener of classical music, in a hall, you expand and you contract and you want these excessive differences. You want
Yes.
your softs to be so soft the audience is leaning in, and you want your louds to just fill up the whole hall.
Oh yeah.
But when you're listening to a recording, what happens is when your softs are that soft, people turn up the volume because they want to hear it. So then your
Right.
loud happens and you blow their eardrums
Yeah.
out and they turn it down. It's so annoying to me to listen to classical music, recorded classical music, because like I feel like I'm constantly adjusting the volume
Yeah.
knob, and it's not. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
not. It
No.
doesn't translate well.
No, it doesn't. It's a problem.
I feel like part of the artistry of classical music is volume, like those,
Oh sure.
really being
Definitely.
able to the contrast of the piano and the forte.
It's a huge part of the artistry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's so opposite the vast majority of commercial recorded music,
Right.
especially pop music. It's all like if you look at the waveform of a pop music track, it's all like it's all like the
Yeah.
same level the whole time.
Well,
Or
and
maybe
even
it's
if you
like,
go to a concert, a pop music or a rock concert,
yeah,
you can kind of expect, like, you're not going to get often something super, super quiet.
right,
It's all going to be
right.
within a range that way. I mean, I like live music, live concerts for those as well.
Yeah, I mean, right. It's
But
not necessarily a problem, but it's just sort of like I feel like maybe recording the experience of listening to recorded music is primarily about that kind of music.
yeah, it
And then
translates
when
way better.
it translates a lot better, yeah. And then so you stick classical into that paradigm, and it was especially like orchestral. I think like I guess chamber music or piano. It's a little
Yeah.
easier. But I remember. Do you remember this one time in I think it was a Missoula class, and he was playing a recording by Osmo Vanska and the Minnesota Orchestra, and it had that problem. And Mark was complaining about the dynamic range in the recording, so he was having to crank it up and you turn it down. And
Yeah, it's a thing. People come to me all the time asking if I can help them figure out if they have a good voice. In fact, I get asked that so much, I made a mini course you can take yourself to help figure out what good means to you, identify your strengths in your voice, and find the areas you can work on to make your voice even better. Head over to zeitgeistacademy.com/radio for free access. That's ZEITGEIST academy.com/radio. Okay, I have something I'm so excited. I want to ask you so bad.
all right.
Okay, so AI art. It started
Oh
with
yeah.
the like physical art, right?
Right.
And then Chat GPT. So now it's gone into language. Do you
Hmm.
think it's gonna do music next? Do you think there's gonna be an AI pulling music next?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is. Pop music has devolved to the point where I think it would be very easy for AI to generate it. It's so
Yes.
formulaic. Everything's auto-tuned already. Everything's synthesized, corrected. So it's basically ready to be just fully computerized music.
Right.
Um,
And then my follow-up question is, do you think that's bad? Do you
I
think that removes artistry?
well, I wouldn't say there is a lot of artistry in that genre I just described. So I don't think
Yeah.
that's bad. I think the part where it's probably going to be bad is where it puts more of the dwindling cadre of working musicians out of business. Like, why hire a composer or studio musicians when I can just get um, music GPT to generate a backing track for me?
But do you
Um,
think that the definition of composer is going to change? Because here's what I see happening with art. First of all, the platform is so new as of right now. It's 2023.
yeah,
We don't have a canon yet. We don't have standards yet. It's everyone is just playing.
right.
Eventually, if you look at history, what happens anytime a new technology enters the scene, people scream at it, say it's going to ruin life. And meanwhile, other people are playing with it. And eventually, somebody starts to really get good at it.
Hmm.
And then that gets called art,
Yeah, so
right?
I think you're onto something with that. I think that's probably a very realistic angle for how these tools are going to play out, is that they're yeah, like they're really hyped up now. They're very new. They're doing these things that are amazing that have AI hasn't been able to do before. But at the end of the day, it's probably not going to be a full replacement. It's going to be another tool like like AutoTune or something like that.
Yeah.
there's probably going to be a lot more AI assist tools for people
Yeah.
to use. Like now, so I think the problem creatively here is potentially, I could see it being a subtle issue of people basically getting a little lazy. Like there's some things that are just monotonous tasks that it would probably be useful for AI to automate.
Yeah.
But if people grow up and get used to AI doing a lot of the composing and arranging tasks for them,
Yeah.
they're not going to have to come to terms with the challenges in there. And they're also going to basically be going with stock answers to these questions of structure and stuff. Like, and maybe they'll probably be highly sophisticated and pleasing. But will it be creative? I I don't know. Maybe it can be creative,
I think it
but
can be, you know, and for, I mean, let's talk about arranging, for example. You could say, you know, you're working on maybe arranging, you know, one symphony to a small group, and you could play it through and say, okay, you know, have the clarinets go to the banjo. What does that sound like? You know,
mhm.
oh, have the clarinets, you know, and it would just do it versus you having to sit there for hours and hours and then you decide you don't like it.
Yeah, sure, sure.
So I feel like it would allow you to play with things to a much greater degree, and then the creativity comes from the input. That's what I think is going to happen with AI art, at least. The artist is going to become it's almost like coding, right? What I choose to put in, you know, that's what generates, rather than I play something and record it and then I loop it and then, you know, whatever.
Oh yeah.
I have an image in my head and I type that in. I feel like it's almost more like coding and
Oh, like
programming.
you're specifying
Yeah.
certain constraints or something.
You create the as the artist. It just changes kind of like what the artist does, right? The artist has an idea and then works to pull, you know, definitions are going to be really important. I don't know. This is all just kind of new to everybody. And I've just been thinking about
Yeah.
it a lot, and I'm trying really hard not to fall into that kids these days, life ruins everything, you know?
Right, right. You've always had that optimism, which I appreciate.
Well, and I think I
Um,
got that from a lot of our college classes and from learning from, you know, we had some professors who really brought things alive. I mean, you were in the class with me where we learned what Zeitgeist meant
right, right.
and
Yep,
got
yep.
so fired up because I think that class was talking about the beginnings of opera. I think that's when that word came out.
Probably, yeah. It was
And
like 19th century music history, probably.
uh-huh, I think so. And Missoula was teaching it.
Yeah.
And I remember that class so vividly because we were all like, he just got us so excited. Like we felt
Yeah.
like we were there, and we felt like, you know, I don't really listen to opera so much on my own. Like I don't seek it out. Live performance maybe, but I don't listen to it, recordings of it very often. I just, for whatever reason. But I remember just being enthralled and feeling like I was there.
Yeah.
And he had such a way of making you realize that people are people all the
Hmm.
time, you know, and whatever's new and exciting is exciting and new, you know, and it will
Yeah.
eventually be old. So I'm really trying to take that mindset with.
All right, wait. All right, here's an analogy maybe. And this maybe supports your idea. Think about movies
Yeah,
and CG.
yeah, yeah,
So CG got really big in, say, the 90s into the aughts, and then for the past, 20-ish plus years, um, Hollywood movies are heavily CG, and some of them are just like 100% CG. And that's part of why I don't go to see movies anymore, because other decisions too, but I think it's like starting to lose its amazement. And if you did you see the newer Mad Max movie, Fury Road?
I didn't, but I want to, but
Okay,
I haven't yet.
check it out sometime. It's good. And one of the interesting things they did in there, which I think is the sort of support of your argument, is so CG doesn't have the glitz it had, and it's like you can sort of tell now. It's like, this
Right,
looks fake,
right,
even if it's like it used to look amazing.
right,
So Fury Road, what they did was they actually they built a bunch of these post-apocalyptic, dune buggies, they filmed it out in Africa somewhere in the desert, and they used basically a lot of actual shots of there were stunt people. All those there's this group of old ladies on motorcycles that is, that they actually were, old ladies on motorcycles running around in the desert. And then they used CG for the stuff that really is just insane to do practically, like, a giant tornado and sort of trucks swirling around in it. And but they didn't do it like, gee, wow, look at this amazing CG. It was just like, and here's this crazy thing happening over there.
Yes.
But the focus is on the human element. So I think the optimistic scenario then for AI in music is that there's probably going to be a phase that's really going to irritate me personally, and maybe not a lot of other people.
Oh, a lot of other people.
So then
people are very irritated by AI
yeah,
art right now.
yeah, and it's like, I mean, there's another funny thing. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
So I think one of the pitfalls that people are going to run into eventually if they try to do more than just have them be toys is the fact that nobody really seems to understand the decision-making patterns of these things. They're just trained, and then like on stuff, they're just trained and trained and trained and trained, and it's like, oh good, you can finally do what I want. Well, how did it do that? Well, I can tell you how I trained it, but I can't tell you how it made this decision to make this thing out of these parameters.
But I feel like that's where the art is going to happen, because as the artist, you have to control that.
Right. So there could be a new sort of genre of art.
I think so. I think your analogy to CGI is really good. And I think, again, initially right now, people are they're just playing. There's nothing, like I said, there's no canon, there's no standard. It's just new technology. It's like when the camera came out, people hated it. They thought photography was never going to be art. And then as people started trying to make it art, they got mad that it was replacing painting, and said, and now there are definitely like crap photos. I can snap anything on my phone, but I also can appreciate people like photography is now a well-recognized legitimate art.
Now, one thing though, I think that's the analogy for music. That's, I would say it's different, but it's a similar kind of scenario, is music recording and music playback, because it's really valuable to be able to have music recording. But on the other hand, I think a lot fewer people play music because of recorded music. And there's a lot, probably fewer community music scenes now than there used to be. Not just because of other societal reasons, but I think if for some reason we had all the technology we did, but we didn't have recorded music, many more people would play music just to be able to hear it. And you'd go out to a cafe or a bar, there would be musicians there because people want music.
Yeah.
But
well, like the household piano.
That's right.
Yeah.
The household piano or organ or whatever. So that is something that I think is one of these strange losses that it's like, well, I'm not really like, I'm not going to say turn back the clock, let's get rid of recorded music, because recorded music is great, but it ended up, and not only sort of these sort of specifics of extinguishing certain motivations for playing, but it's also influenced and put weird pressures onto people who are learning music, who say like, well, I'm awful because I don't sound like the recording, as opposed to enjoying the music and where they're at, which even if it's at a basic technical level, can still be really evocative and cool. But if you're comparing it constantly to this fully fleshed out, often not even a real performance, because it's like three takes edited into one. So,
and you and I have we've fallen victim to that.
I fall victim to it constantly.
You learning jazz, and I remember we talked about this because you were learning jazz, and you had a moment where you're like, I'm comparing myself playing for all of a month, taking lessons for a month with masters who, like you said, were in a studio when they recorded this, and also have been playing for years. And I think I remember that being a breakthrough moment for you.
Yeah, it was. No, it's interesting. I still do that. I think it's kind of a hard thing to unlearn how to do.
I think that is also a bit of a plague upon classical training.
Yeah, it definitely is. Classical training could be better about that. I think it does instill a bunch of bad habits around
Yeah.
that. Like you can have so many of the benefits of classical training, like the discipline of that is really useful. The specific method of practicing, of breaking things down into sections and
Mm-hmm.
going slow and then going fast. And there's a lot of really good things about, classical music that are just helpful to
Mm-hmm.
musicality, but the perfectionism that's inherent in the current strain of classical music is, I think it's a real problem. And I think
Yeah.
it turns a ton of people off who would otherwise continue playing music, even if just for fun, just for themselves. But if they think,
Yeah.
well, I only ever made it to kind of early intermediate, why bother?
Right.
I kind of suck. I'll just put on a recording if I want to hear music.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing for me to try to play.
I
And how
fight
ridiculous is
against
that?
that so much. And I mean, that's my, I don't always do resolutions, but sometimes I do. And that's my resolution for this year, is to just be okay with where I'm at.
Yeah, it's
Because
hard. It's hard.
I've been learning this one piece. It's actually, I'd love to talk about video game music a little bit later, but it's from a video game, and I've been learning it for
Oh, this
what
is the one with all
feels
those
like 5
like
years.
the fast block chords and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really want to learn it. And I compare myself also to my old self, who was a music major in school. Even I was eventually, actually.
Yeah.
I put the work in.
And you put the work in,
I
you put
just
the time
declared
in.
late,
Yeah.
but I was there, and I did
Oh yeah.
everything. And I had, hours and hours a week, sometimes a day, just to practice.
Yes. I
And
mean, this is
I
something I have
compare
to remind myself
myself
too.
now, right?
Yeah. I do the same thing.
I'm not that.
No, I'm
Can't
not
do
that
that.
either. No, we can't do that now. But yes, we set the standard for ourselves, or we think it's really weird though. Why do we do that? Like it's kind of obvious that we're not devoted to the life of learning as our
Yeah.
kind of primary occupation anymore. Um, but we expect to be able to make that kind of progress or be able to put in the kind of practice time that we used to in college, like so
Right.
long ago at this point. Like, holy crap. It's so unfair.
I know. I know. Yeah. So that's my resolution, just to be okay with where I'm at.
And that, well, and then it's one of these counterintuitive things where if you can actually accept that, that's where you can actually make progress, because you're not going to be fighting yourself so
Yes.
much and throwing up your hands in the air and walking away. Like you're actually going to put in some more time if you're
And
not
I
saying,
practice
yeah,
more
yeah, well,
because
exactly.
I enjoy it. I don't, if I start to feel that voice like, oh, you've practiced this passage for a year, why haven't you got it? It's like, well, stop. I just shut it down. I shut that voice down hard in my head. And then eventually, it's actually pretty cool to me how quickly I adapted, to where now it's easier. Like my brain just doesn't go there. It's like I had to retrain my thought
That's great.
patterns. And I just kind of have fun with it. And so I'll practice it, and I'll be like, this is just neat, boom, boom. Like there's these big blocky rolled chords, like you were saying, and they're fun. They're fun to play. It's fun to roll a chord.
Yeah.
And then I can start to feel, technique coming through that I'm rusty at, but it opens your brain up when you don't let that voice control you, to just be relaxed and creative and open. And that's the place I want to be in with my music.
Hell yeah. Yeah, me too.
Let's talk about video game music for a minute.
All right.
You wrote some.
I have written some video game music.
And you gave me a really interesting perspective on video game music. I always think of it every time now, which is it has to be interesting enough to be nice to listen to, because you'll play oftentimes a level. If it's a hard level, you can play it for quite some time.
Yeah.
But it also has to be boring enough it doesn't bother you, right? It has to be catchy, but not too catchy.
It needs to be able to recede into the background. It's like furniture music, like Satie's idea.
It needs to be there when you need it.
Yeah, and then it's like, yeah, I think there's a strong crossover with minimalism in terms of you have music, it's very repetitive. You're literally, often these tracks are just like a minute or two long, and they're just playing over and over and over again. If you think of some of the most beloved video game music, like the theme from Mario Brothers, I think all these kids playing on their Super Nintendos and just listening to this over and over and over and over and over and over again, maybe driving their parents crazy.
But not too
But
crazy, right? The point
hopefully
of the
not too
music
crazy.
is to not drive you crazy, but also be recognizable. It's
But also,
such
yeah,
an
but
interesting
to be
balance.
evocative. Yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of newer games don't really do this anymore. They've solved that problem by just sort of being what I call mush.
Mush.
Just kind of, yeah, just this sort of ambient stuff. You know, you can't really hum a theme from a lot of, same thing in movies. A lot of newer
Mhm.
movies, you can't really hum a theme from anything. It's just sort of like blurg, you know, some kind of ambient background thing to evoke an emotion of some kind, channel some kind of affect, but it just shirks the burden of being recognizable. So it's
Right.
like that's not. We decided that's not very important.
Well, and again, games like gaming versus like a movie is a passive thing. I sit and I absorb. But if you're gaming, you're actively like, I don't know, you're engaging with the environment in a different way. And also you don't know how long you're going to be there, which I think is so interesting because in a
Right.
movie you're like, okay, this scene we're going to pan over beautiful mountains for 16 seconds and then we're going to zoom in on what
That's
it's
right.
very
That's right.
formulaic.
So, okay, I'll do a recapitulation of this character's leitmotif. That's, 16 seconds, and then we're gonna go into the. But yeah, so with games, it's an interesting compositional challenge in that way. It's kind of a fun puzzle.
Yeah. How did you approach it?
The stuff I wrote that was sort of in the style of old kind of pixel art era game music. It was very, it's like you have a melody, you have bass line, you have a groove. I think the fact of it being groove based is very important because it's sort of like maybe you can say the same thing about the blues. There's some repetitive music, right? It's the same chords, pretty short chord progression going over and over again. But of course, with the blues, that you can go all kinds of places with that structure.
Yeah.
Um, but there's something about having a groove that lets the repetition not be just like stultifying and make you want to just kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, knock yourself out or something.
I feel like
Um,
one of the games that was when I picture a groove in a game, I don't know why, but my first thought is actually Final Fantasy when you're in the just when you're just walking around the big stupid plains grinding, trying to level up. And then I don't know, you go into these battles with bugs and it takes you like a minute to fight these bugs that give you, one experience point. It's just grinding, 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 but
yeah,
it's groovy. Like I could sing you, that
yeah,
groove, but it
yeah,
doesn't get annoying.
right,
Music doesn't get annoying. The grinding gets annoying, but
right. Yeah, that's a game that has some great music.
yeah.
As we're both intimately familiar with.
Yes.
I think we both sang the music before we had played any of the games, right?
Yeah, Ian and I had a very funny interaction with Final Fantasy music, and I have since played several of the games. But was it college? You want to tell that story?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was the last senior year in college. New choir director, Eugene Rogers, brilliant man,
Brilliant
coming
man.
in to try and professionalize our kind of wishy-washy liberal arts choir.
We were
And
so lucky.
and he succeeded enough in making us a more professional unit to get us a gig with a traveling concert series, which was the Final Fantasy Distant Worlds series. And music from Final Fantasy with visuals projected behind, and I think even the composer was there. I think he made an appearance.
I think he did come.
Yeah, so it was just this really cool project, and I had sort of known of Final Fantasy,
Yeah.
but I'd never really played any of the games. And I remember at one point, one of our choir members gave like a little mini lecture on what Final Fantasy was for
I know.
us.
One of our gamers had to educate, like
That's
the one
right.
guy who played all of the
Yeah,
games had to educate the rest of us.
yeah. And then we were just learning this music, and it was just like another choir concert, except we at the end we had this performance, which was I think that was one of the most fun and rewarding performances I've ever done.
Yeah.
We were in this large it's basically like an opera house.
Yeah.
It was one of these places that had a very classic name for a performance venue, the Orpheum. And I just remember the curtain going up and just you felt the cheers rolling across the
It was
stage. It's very physical.
packed. Yeah.
Packed with people or people doing cosplays, full orchestra. It was amazing. And it was, I thought it was a really good concert. Like I felt
Yeah.
very good about it musically. The music was really cool. Like even if I didn't really have any idea about the games, the music was very cinematic and evocative.
I remember what was so cool to me. Again, it's kind of like the physics story where, you know, the mathematical equation, something that's completely outside of my realm, and yet I have an intimate understanding of pieces of it. And this is what I felt like. I hadn't ever played a video game, I think, at that point, really. Maybe Sonic the Hedgehog when I
yeah.
That's not ever anything I did. And yet there was a dies irae in the middle of it, which as a choir
That's
nerd,
right.
like is a very particular part of the choral mass. It's the Day of Wrath. It's got a whole canon behind it of how to set it, and people do it fairly consistently. And then the words were like, it was so funny because the words were like semi-Latin.
Well, yeah, it was
like made up Latin.
Right. Well, it's an example of what I lovingly call Occidentalism. It's a thing that I just love in anime and the anime creative sphere. A lot of just Japanese creative new media is taking influences from the West that are kind of exotic and interesting and synthesizing them in new and fun ways.
Yeah.
So there's a piece of music here for Sephiroth, the villain, composed in the style of a dies irae,
Yes.
with kind of fake Latin lyrics.
That also had enough. It was so funny to me because they had enough Latin that you could actually sort of translate them. Like it wasn't dies irae exactly, but
just
it
gibberish?
was.
I thought it was just gibberish syllables that sounded
it
sort
was
of Latin-y.
like dio ira or something like that. It was
Oh
close,
yeah, it's
you know?
right. Yeah. Similar sounds to that. So yeah, you could imagine it being an alternative fantasy language,
Yeah.
or something. That was like doing the same thing. So
Yeah.
it channeled the sort of essence of the feeling of that, which was really fun. But with this creative spin, it was great. Yeah, like coming from just the musical world, knowing the classics, and then have like, wow, here's this creative, cool spin on a dies irae.
Yeah.
For this like fantasy space villain.
Yeah. And I loved that. Like I feel like most gamers would not know that, and
Probably
I just
not.
that connection to me really deepened. Like, oh, there's more. You know, if you're hiring someone who has that knowledge of music to do your game, like that spoke to me. That told me something. You know, it made me respect the games a lot more.
Yeah,
like I said,
sure.
I've since played several of them and had a good time. But yeah, that concert, I actually got the chance to kind of reprise that when I was in Portland. They came through and did Final Fantasy, and then I also did Zelda. Same thing where it's just a thing that, you know, these orchestras will go and they sell out every time. Live. And it was not the same experience as not with that, you know, again, just we had such a tight choir, and and this was more a group of professionals who volunteered. Not all professionals, but they were, you know, accomplished singers from Portland Symphonic Choir and several other groups that volunteered.
Yeah.
And I don't think we worked as hard. I don't think we sounded as good, and we pulled it off. Like it was different. It was just different, you know.
Sure, it's different.
Kind of energy.
Yeah, but it was funny because the natural thing, of course, in choir in college, we would have these wonderful parties, and we'd go sing our whole repertoire at the concert. We'd go back to somebody's apartment, eat, drink, and be merry, and then we'd sing our whole concert rep again, just for fun.
Drunkapella. Yeah. And then I remember every single choir tour, it was the same thing, just constant singing on the bus. Constant.
That's right. There's
the poor bus drivers were just like, oh my God.
Either they were really lucky or really unlucky.
Yeah. It really never stopped. It was kind of nuts.
Yeah.
Constant singing.
Yeah. It really, I mean, it's kind of amazing because I think just choir was a huge part of my college experience. Like it framed so much of it.
Yeah.
Having that community.
Yeah.
Big anchor for me.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why I continue to stick with it. I have yet to find that kind of community in a choir, but it is a community.
Yeah.
Again, college is a very special time where you just throw a bunch of people who are looking for growth like it's magical. Actually, I think
It's totally
it's so
magical.
cool.
Yeah, it's a magical sort of suspended time that is very unique.
Yeah, and the connections you build are very unique. Like the friendships I have from college, I don't. It's hard to make that in the, in the quote unquote real world.
Yeah, it
Friendships are
is.
are hard, and music just kind of provides an environment, like any hobby, I guess. But I think that's the one I connect to. Is I've always been in choir. There was a period of maybe 2 years after graduation when I moved to a new city, and was just looking around trying to find groups to sing with.
Yeah.
And you have to audition, and then whatever. So that's the only time where I haven't been in choir since college. I think I'm just always kind of looking for that same community.
I have gotten into this shape note singing recently.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. That stuff is crazy.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's
very cool. It's cool microculture.
Yeah, very interesting musical tradition. It was invented in England and sort of early colonial America as a way to educate people in part singing, people who often couldn't read music. So a lot of the older stuff often has kind of an English Renaissance quality to it, because it's the people who would have been starting it would have grown up singing like Bird and things like that. And the shapes of the notes are sort of associated with syllables. There's, rectangles and diamonds and stuff like that, and can be a little disorienting. But it does end up being sort of helpful because they correspond to the degrees of the scale. Yeah, it's a funny tradition because it's very educational. It's definitely part of like a Christian religious tradition, but it's not like a church service. It's sort of more like the intention was to train you so that you could sing good music during the church service. So a lot of the vast majority of the repertoire, it's very kind of these religious lyrics, and it has kind of this coming together quality of that I associate with a lot of American, like I guess the Quaker tradition and sort of more non-hierarchical American Christian traditions. It's about fellowship and equality and getting to the point of things without a lot of extra dogma around it.
Yeah.
So there's kind of an unspoken rule at these gatherings that nobody talks about religion or politics. It's just about the music. And the kinds of people that this tradition draws in, it's very eclectic. Like it's this group of misfits, basically, who are all different types of musical training, all different kinds of backgrounds and interests. But then the crystallizing point is interest in singing shape note music. Enthusiasm for singing shape note music.
Which starts by an awareness of shape note music.
That's right.
Existing.
Yeah, you have to know that it exists, which most people don't, because it's this obscure thing it was dying out, and it used to be very big, but then gradually was replaced by other things that people did as maybe its mission succeeded and people got more educated about music through the 18th and 19th centuries and the 20th. And by the mid 20th century, from what I understand, really was only sung still in the very deep South, like the mountains of Alabama and stuff like that. And at that point, some people in the North were interested in some of these composers, like William Billings, who lived in New England. He was like a Boston, it's like a leather worker or something. There's a lot of these people who were big in the tradition were, just kind of tradespeople, and then the music was a vocational thing on the side. They decided they wanted to try to revive this, so they went down south and were participating in these gatherings, and then they started a sort of a circuit of these singings again. And they had the big convention in Chicago at one point, and all these people from the deep South came up for it and were like helped to kind of relight the flame a little bit. And then it just sort of spread around, and now there's small groups all over the country and even the world too. And you can find them. There's sort of these central databases online of where the singings are, when they are, and it's a very welcoming tradition. That's one of the things I appreciate about it.
Yeah,
it's really the only kind of rule that is expected of you is that you're sort of earnestly approaching it. You sing with gusto and do your best. And it really is like that. It's like not like, oh, you sang a wrong note. It's like, nope, that's not important.
Yeah.
Like it's not that people shouldn't try, but I don't know.
It reminds me so much. It's like the singing version of contra dance, which is something that I do as well.
Yes, it's much like that.
it's got historical roots. It's very just kind of messy and smiley and
Yep.
very open to beginners. Can get technical if you want it to, but
Yeah.
you don't have to have any experience walking in and just doing it.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
contra dancing is a perfect analogy for it.
I bet there's crossover too between people who do shape note singing and
There
people
are.
who contra dance.
There definitely are. Yeah, that's sort of a group of misfits too, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So in our college class, that Zeitgeist, that to me was what I now call, because I have a business, a Zeitgeist moment, where like
Yeah.
you're in experiencing something, and the history and the whole everything of it just comes alive for you, and you're like, I get this, and you're kind of overwhelmed by it. So I've just started calling that a Zeitgeist moment.
Nice.
Where was your last Zeitgeist moment?
Ooh. I've had a few of those recently. Where was my last Zeitgeist moment? So where sort of like this synthesis, right, of a lot of things coming together and you have
And
this
you just
epiphany.
feel it. Yeah.
You really feel it.
Yeah.
Gosh, I feel like I've had a lot of little ones as
Yeah.
I've been exploring jazz,
Yeah.
where I'll be playing a piece and things will click and I'll just really kind of get it at a certain level. I think a lot of these little moments have been for me when a technique I'm trying to learn crystallizes a bit. Like you know how you can know something abstractly and agree with it, but you
Yeah.
don't really know it until you experience it or practice it.
Execute it.
So,
Yeah.
so
Successfully.
yeah, execute successfully. So one of the things I'm trying to work on in my playing is to play enough complexity basically to satisfy me, but play like the bare minimum, if that makes any sense technically,
Sure.
so that I'm not focused on all these technical things, but I'm really thinking about the music. And I think then the specific little zeitgeist moment I had was this realization that I can really just play like one or two notes in my left hand. And that can sound really good, and that can provide a foundation for the chords and the feeling. And then I was starting to do these fairly simple left-hand patterns, but get a lot of mileage out of them. And all of a sudden it was like I was flying a little bit. And now I'm like focusing on the right hand. It's like, okay, well, this is great. I can do sort of melody on the right hand, focusing mostly on melody. And then eventually, as I have the bandwidth for, I can add in some extra chord tones. So I think the zeitgeist moments have been these little revelations that just get me a little closer to, it's like this feeling of merging in with the
Yeah.
music that I love, where I'm like able to inhabit it for these brief moments. It's like it doesn't matter that I don't have the full level of knowledge that I'd like to have, because in that moment I am the music and the music is me, you know?
Yes.
It's
Exactly.
so yeah, those are the kinds of zeitgeist moments I've been having.
Sweet. Thanks. Well, Ian, thank you so much for being on my podcast. I
Oh,
really
thanks for having me.
appreciate
This
it.
is a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Zeitgeist Radio. If you'd like to take the next step in your musical journey, head over to zeitgeistacademy.com/radio for my free course to help you figure out if you have a good voice. You can also check out my online course on the basics of singing, Discover Your Voice, made especially for introverted women. Music for this episode was created by Ian Boswell. Please hit that subscribe button and tell all your friends you found a cool new podcast. See you next time.